This week on the True Geordie Podcast, we go into the dark world of Scientology with former high-ranking member Claire Headley. Claire had a lucky escape from Scientology after over a decade of abuse, working directly with high-ranking members like David Miscavige and even Tom Cruise. Claire testified at the trial of that 70s show actor Danny Masterson after Scientologists actively silenced his victims to protect him from being punished for his crimes. And in this podcast, Claire goes in depth on the levels of abuse she was subjected to as a child and even later being forced to have multiple abortions. Not to mention her husband, who was also rammed off the road while driving away to escape Scientology. Which is why Claire is now bravely speaking out in the hope of preventing others from the same fate. This is the True Geordie Podcast with Claire Headley. Welcome back to the True Geordie Podcast. Today I'm joined by an amazing guest with a hell of a story. It's Claire Headley. Thanks for coming on, Claire.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, me too. I've always been quite interested in Scientology. And of course, you're now doing like a YouTube channel and you've got a book and all sorts. So could you just mention that before we get on the road?
Yes, very definitely. My husband, Mark, and I have a YouTube channel. It's called Blown for Good, Exposing Scientology. We have more than 200 videos, more than 5 million views at this point. We're just starting out, but Our goal is to expose the abusive practices of Scientology, help spread the word and share people's stories of their experiences within that organization. And for my husband and I, we both escaped in 2005. My husband's book is called Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology.
Wow. And from what I understand, you both were quite high-ranking members in Scientology, yeah?
Yes, I was born into Scientology, and then I spent 14 years working in Scientology's C organization, which is where members are required to sign a billion-year contract. I worked at the headquarters of Scientology in California, including 8 years in Religious Technology Center, which is run by the current leader of Scientology, David Miscavige.
Yeah, that guy, he's got scary written right into his face, yeah. And,
big time.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm assuming, have you met him, I'm assuming?
Oh, many times, yeah. I worked directly with him for 8 years.
Wow.
So yes, I've seen him physically abuse staff many, many times. And of course my experiences at that level of Scientology now drive my work to expose Scientology as someone that was born into it. It was never a choice for me until the day I made my escape. So it's my goal to not have anyone fall prey to this cult.
One of the things that I think is, for me, quite easy to understand is how easy it would be for someone who's born into something to be brainwashed to such a degree, because what chance has anyone got, like, when you're born into it? So yeah, I have a lot of empathy for you, definitely. And if you could just give us like just some broad basic things that the beliefs are in Scientology.
Yes. So Scientology was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, who's a science fiction writer, pulp fiction writer from the 50s. That's a whole story in and of itself. I always highly recommend that people read Barefaced Messiah by Russell Meller. It tells the true story of L. Ron Hubbard and who he is. But in terms of the belief system, a Scientologist would tell you it's an applied philosophy. It's a system of beliefs and practices that they use in their day-to-day life. And it is an all-encompassing system. So it's very different from what you might consider if you think of a Roman Catholic or a Catholic or a Christian, go to church once a week or, pray. Scientology is nothing like that. It's a complete system.
Is it more like a way of life, so to speak, like a lot of rules and regulations and ways to live by?
Yes, very definitely. Yeah. Your relationship, your work, your how you parent your children, every single aspect of your life has beliefs and practices that are considered the body of Scientology.
Is that sort of when I hear things like, oh, I'm at OT8, like, when people reach the certain highest level of knowledge, is that like pay to learn or?
Very definitely, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In fact, there's been several series of studies done as to what the costs involved are. But yes, each level, as you progress up the levels, is you pay more and more money. And OT is operating thetan. So, and that's driven by the belief in Scientology that you're not a soul, but you are a thetan. It's not an exact parallel term. But it's equivalent.
L. Ron Hubbard definitely had a great imagination, it seems. And in terms of the story behind it, am I right in thinking some of this is sort of alien related or not?
Yes, you are correct about that. That specifically is part of operating thetan level 3, which in Scientology is referred to as the Wall of Fire, which has a very specific narrative that that planet Earth is a prison Earth, and that many beings were brought here by Xenu, the galactic overlord, 75 million years ago, dropped into volcanoes. It's quite elaborate. I'll spare you all the details.
Most lies usually are, right? Like,
yes. It's to simplify it, I would say it's one of the most elaborate cases of the Emperor's New Clothes that you probably have ever encountered.
Okay, yeah. Obviously, to people who haven't been indoctrinated into this from a young age, it does seem ridiculous, right? But a lot of grown people do turn to it for whatever reason. And I wondered if you had a theory as to why it gained so much popularity. What was it that drew people in?
First of all, Scientology tends to prey on people who are vulnerable or having at a time in their lives where they're struggling. So, for example, my mother was brought in at age 17 by her brother. She had been raised Roman Catholic in England, and she was pregnant. She'd been doing some drugs, hippie time in the 70s. So this was her way to break free of that control that she felt she was under. It's kind of like out of the pan into the fire kind of a situation, or vice versa, depending on which way you look at it. But so, and at the outset, Scientology will say, oh, what's true for you is what's true. So meaning you can take the pieces that work for you and discard the rest. That's kind of one way they get their foot in the door. But nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, you are expected to 100% accept Hubbard's system and apply it to every aspect of your life. Nothing is optional in Scientology. Another part is they get people by saying they accept people of all beliefs. Again, that's not true. So, there's carefully crafted lies at the front door that lure people in. And in this day and age, they have renovated beautiful buildings that also make people go, oh, let's see what this is about. Fortunately, again, there's now many people who have shared their stories very bravely of their experiences in Scientology. So all one would really need to do is Google, and you would learn the true facts, not the glossy facade that they present.
In terms of L. Ron Hubbard himself, now knowing what you know, looking back, what would you describe him as? What kind of man would you describe him as? If you could maybe compare him to someone else in history, is he even comparable?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I never met him personally. But of course, I grew up seeing the busts of his head, everywhere. I spent my childhood at St. Hill, which is the headquarters in West Sussex, England. I was there until age 13. So he was, as a child growing up in Scientology, I always thought he was this mystical person to be worshipped. Like, every time I would study Scientology in their training rooms, at the end of every period, you stand up and clap and hip, hip, hooray, like
Wow.
fanatical worship. And having no perspective, being that I was born into it, that was just the life I knew. I have to kind of hand it to the level of mad genius that Hubbard had of, I think, studying groups and ways to control people and poaching what he saw worked and kind of concocting it into this body of data that has trapped a lot of people, destroyed many, many families, hurt a lot of people, and meanwhile, bullied themselves into a position of having tax-exempt status here in the United States, and amassing billions of dollars. So, but again, that's why I do what I do, to educate people on the true nature of this organization.
Yeah, and the guy who sort of took the mantle from him was David Miscavige, who is, the modern day leader. Can you kind of give me an idea of sort of how he took the mantle and what kind of direction he changed? Did he change Scientology for better or worse, or did he mold it in his own image, or has he just continued on what L. was already going to do? How's he changed things?
Yes, great question. So David Miscavige took over in 1986 when L. Ron Hubbard died. David Miscavige very carefully maneuvered himself into a position of power, removed anyone else who had previous authority or status or any potential other replacements. He carefully maneuvered those people out of the picture. He is a very domineering, controlling, abusive person, micromanaged so many aspects of Scientology. He was very unforgiving, ruthless, and domineering, demanding and commanding complete compliance with everything that he set out to be accomplished. And his whole program, he referred to it as ideal orgs, creating these ideal organizations all over the world.
What do you think the worst thing David Miscavige has probably done in his life is?
There's no oversight of this person, no government control, nothing. So he is running, for all intents and purposes, his own world and can get away with whatever he wants to as a result. Like, just take the example of his wife, Shelley Miscavige, who I knew personally and worked with for many years. She has not been seen in public now for many, many years. She was at his side 24/7 during the entire 14 years that I worked at the management headquarters. She was a pivotal figure, and she had worked with L. Ron Hubbard since she was 11 years old. Anyway, so to take the fact that David Miscavige has gotten away with vanishing his wife, just as one small example. I mean, there are many questions should be asked about what David Miscavige has been doing and where are the authorities in investigating some of these matters.
Is it possible that she is no longer alive?
Anything's possible. I don't believe that's the case, though. Most recently, we were sent a voter registration record of hers from a very remote part of Northern California where Scientology has secret property. That's and so I believe that David Miscavige has done to his wife Shelley the very same thing that L. Ron Hubbard did to his wife Mary Sue Hubbard. Scientology was found guilty and charged with the largest infiltration of U.S. government in its history, and 12 of Scientology's top members went to jail for this, including L. Ron Hubbard's wife.
For infiltrating the government?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. There was a raid by the FBI Scientology properties in the late 70s, I believe.
What do you mean by infiltrating the government? Just so I fully understand what do you mean that they're working in high positions and like getting information? Yes. Wow.
Yes, they were copying documents. If you anyone wanting to know more, just search up Operation Snow White, and there's a lot of information out there about this. And yeah, so again, Scientology has been around since the 50s, and they have a very tarnished and sordid history through all of that.
And you know how some of these sort of cults, they seem to be very sexually charged, especially towards the top. Did you see any of that in regards to these kind of characters, or was it not really that sort of vibe?
Yes, it is a culture of violence and also cover-up and sexual assault of minors covered up. There's unfortunately, there are many, many examples. The very culture and nature of Scientology is to cover things up, protect themselves, never report to authorities, never involve the police. And so, yes, because of that, it's an environment where predators can get away with crimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even take the situation with my husband and I. My husband escaped from the headquarters in California on January 4th, 2005. He was chased and run off the road by their security guards. And as it happened, a passerby saw this happening and called 911, and the police showed up. There's a police report of this incident that's in his book. But either way, my point being, what would have happened if that random passerby hadn't called the police? He wouldn't have succeeded in escaping. So certainly the covering up crimes is definitely part of the culture of Scientology.
And I guess for most people, the first time we kind of became aware of Scientology from the outside looking in is these big fancy galas that they have, which look far better than the Oscars even. The amount of money they must spend on these things is ridiculous. And the celebrities who are, involved in this world, which I'm assuming they're using as some sort of fishing rod to make people want to, hook them and come on in. And you actually happen, from my research, to be familiar with a lot of these guys. In fact, you testified in the Danny Masterson case. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Wow. And my question, basically, because I was a real fan of this guy, right, when I was a kid. I used to watch the TV show, That 70s Show, loved this show. And I was oblivious as how many of these actors and actresses on the show were Scientologists. So I guess my first question is, why are there so many celebrities, in this religion? And then if you can, explain to me sort of the broad details of what you know about the Danny Masterson case and why you testified.
Absolutely. So yes, attracting celebrity and using their realm of public influence was specifically a strategy devised by Hubbard to work on pulling in people who influence opinions to be able to say, oh, look at Tom Cruise, he's a Scientologist, and use that to lure people in. Very intentionally and specifically. I will say that in this day and age, and again, I think this is in large part due to the internet and YouTube and Leah Remini's series, Scientology in the Aftermath, the Going Clear HBO documentary, the amount of information in the public domain in this day and age is such that I think they're far less effective in today's this age than they have been previously. And I don't think that their celebrity membership is dwindling, not growing.
Social media has probably not helped that a great deal. Yeah.
No.
And the Danny Masterson situation, what do you like? Could you break down just the basics for us so we get the case, an idea of the case?
The case involved 3 Jane Does, these incredibly brave, strong women who went forward with charges of rape, And in fact, they had each been members of Scientology when these crimes were perpetrated. I was approached by the DA's office in Los Angeles asking me to testify about my knowledge of the policy, procedures, practices of Scientology. And the reason that came into play is because these crimes were perpetrated in the early 2000s. I think it was like roughly 2000 to 2004. And there were reports made to Scientology, as is the practice for a Scientologist, about these crimes that had been committed. And instead of reporting those crimes to police, as one would expect, the victims were silenced and they were targeted. And again, this is part of the practice of Scientology. So where my testimony came in is originally the judge had ruled that Scientology could not be discussed or even talked about because they were not arguing that the crimes were committed. But then the defense changed that strategy. And that's where it was important that the terminology, the language, and the practices and the policies was critical because there were reports made to Scientology.
Yeah. And I'm assuming they silenced these girls because they wanted their little star to make sure he doesn't go to jail, because he has, I mean, at that time, tremendous pull. It was one of the biggest shows on TV.
That's right.
I think you had one of these girls at gunpoint even.
That's right.
So yeah, that was, I mean, it was insane to hear that would be going on with a guy who was so famous. And I mean, he got quite a long sentence from memory.
To my knowledge, it's 30 years to life.
Wow. Okay.
Because it's multiple counts. Hats off to these women. Their bravery is just outstanding in this matter. To persist through what Scientology will do to somebody trying to expose them is out of this world. I mean, my family and I have been harassed and followed and had all manner of what Scientology refers to as fair game for the last 18 years since we've been exposing their practices.
It begs the question what else they've covered up by putting on this kind of pressure onto people, because, you know, people are just people, and to be like you and your husband, or, you know, a two-man band, as we'd say, to go up against such a mega powerful organization with all that money, I can't imagine how stressful that's been. And I definitely want to talk more about your story as we go. And you mentioned Tom Cruise earlier, who has got to be the most famous guy, and that was kind of my first sort of understanding of what Scientology was, because there was this video that got leaked when he was going like, "You're an SP, man," and I just want to tell them, "Wake up!" You know what I mean? We've all sort of seen that.
Very good, very good imitation.
It was crazy, and like, as someone who doesn't really understand Scientology at that point, you're like, what is an SP? A suppressive person, and you know, down the rabbit hole we sort of went. But can you describe to me Tom Cruise's role in Scientology, and if you've met him, what he's like?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, I have met him. In fact, Tom Cruise counseled my husband, which is covered in my husband's book.
Damn. When you say counseled, can you explain?
Yes, he did Scientology therapy, if you will, on my husband. It's called auditing. Again, the language of Scientology is so deep and so isolating that, you know, you could get two Scientologists in a room and they could have a conversation. You wouldn't understand a single thing of what they just said.
Well, the words sound scary, and I assume deliberately to make you feel like, oh, this is very official. You know, like it's very cleverly selected. Even that word auditing, like that's something that should be taken seriously. You know,
right?
So Tom Cruise is sat in front of your husband, auditing his mind, essentially. I mean, has your husband described what that was like to go through?
Yes, he has a great length. And also, too, I did have personal interaction with Tom Cruise during the time that I was in Religious Technology Center. Obviously, Tom Cruise definitely received very preferential treatment within Scientology. By the end, in the later years, he was David Miscavige's closest friend, closest ally, closest confidant, and such that Shelley Miscavige, David's wife, then ran the project to find Tom Cruise a wife, which resulted in his marriage to Katie Holmes. Which obviously, yeah.
Katie Holmes is a Scientologist as well?
No.
Oh, okay. They just selected her for him, sort of thing.
That's right.
Damn.
But yeah, and again, look at history. If you read what Katie Holmes went through to get out of that relationship with her daughter, and I mean, that's that, again, you're talking celebrities, and she had to escape in the dead of night too, pretty much.
Wow. So in terms of his personality, Tom, when you're interacting with him, what level, like, because I kind of assume he'd be quite a borderline arrogant, like if you want to be that high up in any organization and absorb so much power, probably something not right with you in my book. So like, what kind of character would you describe him as?
I would characterize Tom Cruise as a very domineering, controlling person. And again, during my time in Religious Technology Center, I had to work with his staff who had been hand selected by David Miscavige and Shelley Miscavige. So in other words, he was completely surrounded by Scientologists, specifically and intentionally so. During the time that Tom was married to Nicole Kidman, David Miscavige had said that Tom was actually drifting out of Scientology. And then that was very aggressively dealt with to drag Tom back in. But so
do you think Nicole Kidman was part of the reason he was drifting out, and maybe the divorce of her was part of the reason he was brought back in, maybe?
Yes, I do. I know Marty Rathbun at the time was David Miscavige's right-hand man, and Marty Rathbun was very involved in the whole divorce proceedings between Tom and Nicole. Yes. So again, it just shows you, like what religion would control people's relationships, control who they can talk to, control every aspect of their life with their staff. It just, again, begs the question, what's really going on here? And I knew from working with Tom's staff that he could be abusive and
abusive in what way?
Verbally, in some cases, physically, at least a few instances that were described to me. I didn't witness it personally, but it was described to me that he would often lose his temper. And so he...
What kind of a physical thing did they say he did?
Well, one example was this. One of his staff said that he threw them up against a fridge and was yelling and verbally abusive. That's one
did they
situation
say why?
that was no.
Because I can't understand what they could be like. What you know what I mean? Like what could be wrong? Do you know what I mean? Like if you're in this sort of religion, usually, you're supposed to be praying. Like these are the things that we know. Like obviously it's the furthest thing from a religion. The way I'm hearing it right now.
Right. Yeah, and that is part of where it's important to deconstruct and understand what is this, because slapping a label on it and saying, oh, it's a religion. That's what Scientology wants you to do.
Yeah.
Don't ask questions. Don't learn about what's happened to actual members or, don't, and again, so going back to, we were talking about the upper levels and the elaborate story. Here's a great example of a control lever within Scientology. Members are not allowed to compare notes. You're like, if you were on the OT3 and I was on OT3, we couldn't have a conversation and go, because it's confidential and you're not allowed to discuss it. So
I'm just imagining me, like, you heard about OT3? Can't believe it. Can't believe it. Didn't expect that. Do you know, like, but the way it's been constructed clearly by L. Ron Hubbard is so divisive to make sure no one ever talks to each other and realizes what the real game is, which is power goes up, shit rolls downhill usually. And now, a word from our sponsors. Now, breaking a habit can be as difficult as getting in the ring with Mike Tyson with one arm behind your back. But don't worry, lads, Fume has got you covered. Because not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from the habit? And Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavoured air device that does just that. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavoured air. And instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses delicious flavors. And your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. And I love these flavors. This is crisp mint, which is one of my favorites. And you can imagine if vapors are like a sticky, sugary soda, this is a lot more like a healthy tea. Not as sweet, but a lot more natural. And also just the look and feel of this thing, you can fidget with it and keep your hands occupied to sort of not go back to the bad habit. And you know these pens that people have, they're like shiny, and to be honest, they're not as cool as this. This is wood grain, baby. Wood grain. It's a bit more mature. And Fume have sent me a journey pack, which is the ultimate starter pack if you're trying to break a habit. So get your year off to a good start by going to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com/true to get your journey pack today. And in order to make starting the good habit even easier, Fume is giving you 10% off when you use my code TRUE, that's true, all block capitals, at checkout. So big thanks to Fume for making us all a little bit healthier, but for now, enjoy the video. Yeah.
Right. Completely. And the smoke and mirrors and the programming. So, it is control, and that's where I think the Lawrence Wright's book, Going Clear, Scientology and the Prison of Belief, he referred to it as a prison of belief. To me, that's such an appropriate label, because when you have the level of indoctrination at a certain point, you start doing the work yourself. So, for example, simple, seemingly benign concept in Scientology, any critical thought is a bad thing. If you say, hey, David Miscavige just beat someone up, that's a critical thought, which means that you've done something wrong. You yourself, the only reason you're having a critical thought is because you've committed a crime. And so, it just kind of, it's layer upon layer of these control mechanisms that, and again, in my case, I was born into it. This was being programmed in from age 4. So it's really hard to unravel that and walk that back.
I mean, for you to get out after being born into it, shows, it must have taken unbelievable strength, but also, ironically, critical thinking. The ability to go, something's not right here, and strength. But one more thing about Tom Cruise actually was one of the other first instances I seen about Scientology was Leah Remini on Joe Rogan's podcast, and she said, like, when people say, why would Tom Cruise need Scientology? He's a big celebrity, all the money in the world, everyone loves him. And she goes, yeah, but like, even as a celebrity, you can pay for, I want to paraphrase, but you pay for servants and people adore you. But the level of power you get from being basically, Jesus, in Scientology, where people will look at you as a person of worship, it's a whole nother level of control and influence where you are spoken to, not like a celebrity and a good actor, but like a god.
Right.
And that really nailed it for me. And I went, oh, that's why he's in it. He gets off on this. He wants the ultimate power, and that he can't have that level of power anywhere else. Do you think that's fair?
I do. I absolutely think that's fair. It would be hard to imagine that Tom Cruise doesn't know the level that Scientology has infiltrated his entire life, and he's probably welcomed it. But yes, that godlike worship. For sure. I mean, David Miscavige would take Tom Cruise around the headquarters and demand that the staff jump up and say, yes, sir, Mr. Cruise, like absolute worship for sure. That's absolutely a big part of it, I'm sure.
And they do the sort of like salute, right? Like, and but from what I remember, L. Ron Hubbard was like a failed Navy guy. So he managed to like write this into the religion because he's like, I'd really like to still do a bit of that. So we'll work that in. Which is like, because I used to work at sea, and I found that bit quite funny. Like, yeah, you just got to make sure you can still do that.
And he worked in the naval uniforms and all those elements. You're absolutely right. I've had to be fair, I've had the exact same thought. Like, oh, I get it. That just take the bits that you wanted to experience or that you enjoyed, and it's having talked with many, heard from people in the actual Navy, in the actual military who actually serve our countries. It's just, oh my gosh, it's embarrassing in retrospect.
but if anything, that should be one of the biggest clues that this is all just a figment of his imagination, that like we're all wandering around dressed up as Navy guys where, when none of us are, we're not at sea. You know what I mean? Like, this is not necessary for any reason other than it looks kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned Leah Remini, who has played a huge part in, I guess, exposing a lot of this. She is actually suing Scientology, from what I've read in the last 6 months. What do you make of Leah, her story, and taking on the church, in court?
Yes. Leah Remini is absolutely a fierce, brave whistleblower advocate. The work she has done since getting herself and her family out of Scientology is absolutely incredible. She has my greatest respect. I mean, it really takes, it is a David and Goliath type situation. As we were talking about earlier, this is $1 billion organization that has had 7 decades of the practice of silencing, destroying, muzzling. And those are words Hubbard used, by the way, as to what should be done with anyone who speaks. Silence them, destroy them utterly. Like I said, there's decades of documentation of Scientology working to destroy people's lives. So Leah could have just left and gone on with her life, and instead she's become one of the most vocal advocates exposing the abusive practices of Scientology. And so in this current lawsuit, Scientology's practice of fair game is certainly a significant focus of exposing what Scientology does to its critics. Like, take the example of my husband and I. Up until right now, today, Scientology is running paid Google ads to promote their hate sites on my husband and I that have videos of my mother, for example, and my brother, my stepfather, my cousin. What religion does this to people?
These people who you've just listed, am I right in thinking they are still in Scientology and they are saying bad things about you and your husband? Is that correct?
Yes.
Wow.
Exactly.
And they're paying adverts for that.
Yes.
Jesus.
Scientology uses tax-exempt dollars to attempt to destroy, silence, muzzle anyone who says anything that they don't like about Scientology.
And you've just mentioned how much money this company, which it's a company, right? It's at least $1 billion company, right? And looking at the gala, looking at the size and the grandiose buildings that they've built, and how well turned out a lot of these people are. You wonder where the money's come from. And one thing I did notice from one person's account was that they pay a lot of these low-level, sort of entry-level Scientologists like slave wages, like next to no money, and they're just absorbing every bit of wealth, and it's going like right to the very top. But do you know any of the actual like ways they've made huge amounts of money?
They have an organization that's referred to as the International Association of Scientologists. People donate millions and millions of dollars. They have all these different, silver, platinum, meritorious, whatever their labels are. They have wealthy Scientologists who have donated, including Tom Cruise, by the way, millions and millions of dollars for just to amass wealth. So the International Association of Scientologists alone probably represents a massive portion of the wealth that Scientology and the billions of dollars that they've amassed. If you go back to in 1993 is when the IRS granted Scientology tax exempt status. And so there was a big event that David Miscavige did in Los Angeles. And in the speeches there, he says, well, it's a good thing they granted us this. Otherwise we could be in jail right now.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. Thanks. Good to know.
Do you know how many people are in Scientology, or did they never disclose that?
That's a good question. They do not disclose that. If you read their propaganda, they'll say, oh, we've got unprecedented expansion. We're on Super Bowl ads. They'll run Super Bowl ads.
Whoa, they put Super Bowl ads out. That's
yes.
wild. Wow. I don't know why, but that's just blown my mind. That. Like you've got like Coca-Cola and then you're going straight to, and if you fancy a bit of Scientology, we've got you covered as well. That's wild. Oh my God.
Right? I know. Yeah.
Because they aren't cheap, right? Like, so, yeah. So do you, all right, so they're saying they've got millions of people there. Do you genuinely think more and more people are joining up, or do you think all of this bad press is sort of hindering that, or no?
I absolutely think that their membership is dwindling for sure. I think, there's been thoughts bounced around, but I think the closest to accurate is probably that their membership worldwide is maybe around 30,000 now.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. I've just twigged that now I've done this podcast with you, they're probably not going to accept me, which is a real shame. But we'll let it go.
Please don't. Please don't. Please.
Unless, I've got to be honest, if they want to pay me a load of money and put me really high up, I'll think about it. But
no, I worked in the Sea organization for 14 years and made $46 a week during that time.
Oh my God, $46 a week. I assumed that you were sort of like living off of like a system where they give you your food and it's just they extract all the money.
That's right.
Right.
Yes. And in the Sea organization, you're working hundreds of hours a week, so it's not a 9-to-5 job.
Jesus. What are you doing for all those hours a week? Like what kind of work?
For about 5 or 6 years, I was involved in staff training. So I would oversee staff study of Hubbard materials. And then during the years that I was in Religious Technology Center, I was over human resources, getting new people, finances. For 4 years, I was an executive reporting under Marty Rathbun and David Miscavige. So again, 8 a.m. to midnight most days, and oftentimes all-nighters. There was about 2 or 3 years where I was considered to be in trouble because Marty Rathbun had escaped. And so that was my fault, supposedly. And so I was denied dining privileges. Like the punishments and the abuse are really extreme. And
you say dining privileges, meaning what, they would restrict your food?
No, I was, so as a punishment, I was required to only eat meals next to this giant dumpster, like a whole trash receptacle area, as a demeaning, humiliating form of punishment for somebody escaping from the headquarters. So, cruel and unusual punishment at the hands of David Miscavige was very common.
Can you explain to me how they would tell you you're eating over there? Like, would David Miscavige tell you, or would someone else come over? And what kind of tone of voice are they like? Is this like really nasty, or? Oh
yeah. It wasn't. So in my case, it wasn't directly by David Miscavige. It was by the person who was the ethics. The ethics officer is the title. It's like the police within that organization. That's who enforces. The term for it, in Hubbard's words, is make the punishments for non-compliance too gruesome to be faced and enforce them. That's kind of the tone and environment that Scientologists, but even more so members of the Sea organization, live in.
It seems incredibly cruel. Some of the things that I've read up and some of the things you're saying right now, and like it feels just like weak people getting off on power over even weaker people who are struggling with the being subjected to that. Is that fair?
That is fair, definitely. And I will say that I think there are very good people in Scientology who probably were lured in because they want to help people. They want the world to be a better place. The problem is that, you walk in at the ground level. By the time you're at the top of the building, you realize there's no way out. And very often you've got your family is in, your friends are in, perhaps your job is dependent on your continued cooperation with Scientology. So it can be very, very hard to exit.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you were raised in it, which you were. And in terms of like being a child in Scientology, what was that like? Obviously, your mother raised you in Scientology.
So my mother got into Scientology when she was pregnant with me. When I was 4 years old, as a single mother, she joined the Sea organization. So she signed the billion-year contract. At that point, for all intents and purposes, I was handed off to staffers of the Sea organization. I from age 4 to age 10, I was lucky if I saw my mom 2 hours a week.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that she was a single mother, and you mentioned earlier about vulnerable people. I'm assuming that they would have preyed on someone like her, thinking, okay, this someone's maybe going through a tough time, desperate. We've got all the answers. But in terms of your mother, all right, it's one thing being desperate looking for answers. It's another thing accepting only seeing your child 2 hours a week. So why do you think she managed to make herself okay with that?
Yeah. I think that, she was very young. And she believed she was helping a bigger cause. And, in Scientology, the approach is that you're required to do what they refer to as what's the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. And the 100% priority is given to the group of Scientology and doing what's best for Scientology above and beyond what's best for yourself or your family or anything else. That's kind of how it's presented and what the indoctrination requires. So, I think I know she didn't like it. There were often times that I even recall as a child that she was crying because, for example, when I was 6 years old, she was sent away to Europe to recruit new members for several months. And when she told me that she had to go, she was crying and told me that she asked them if they could reconsider, but that she had to go and do this. Otherwise she was going to get in a lot of trouble. That's a huge burden to place on a 6-year-old child. Like what,
Wow.
What, she was just said, well, I'm going to send you postcards, and these people who are, by the way, complete strangers are going to look after you. This is your new family.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And what kind of people were you left with?
Other members of the Sea organization. They were so, because I saw her so little, I can't say it was a huge change, but nonetheless, it was definitely a huge loss, even as a child, to go why can't I just have a normal life and be with my mom like other kids are?
Yeah, what kind of living circumstances was it for you? Because I'm thinking, okay, you're 6-7 years old here. Are you in a big room full of people? What was it like?
Yes, they had communal lodging. Oh, gosh. Probably maybe 40, 50 kids. And there was a girls' dorm and a boys' dorm. Really, for the reality is we were orphans.
Yeah, it sounds like
and orphans with a Lord of the Flies twist, because we were responsible for supervising and taking care of each other. So, for example, when I was 7, I was responsible for 5 other kids, and I had to make sure that they brushed their teeth, that they made their beds, that they did their homework, things of this nature. That there was maybe 1 or 2 adults supervising that many children. It's as a parent now, it's absolutely horrifying, and truly, you just go, how is this even legal that they could get away with this? They no longer have cadet organizations. They now instead make it illegal in Scientology for members of the C organization to have children. And if a member of the C organization does get pregnant, they're forced and coerced to have an abortion.
Wow. So, I'm sure people get pregnant fairly regularly because it's human nature to want to have sex, right? So, do you know anyone who was forced to have an abortion?
I was. Twice, actually. And this was during the time that I was working at the headquarters. I knew that if I even put up one hair of fight, that they would put me on heavy manual labor. It's something else to be trapped in that world. And again, this is what motivates me to expose this organization for what they do. Nobody should ever be forced to make a decision about something so important and significant and so personal. And the first time I swore that if it ever happened again, I would just refuse. The problem is that the second time, I was in Florida, my husband was in California, and I had to write a request to be able to call my husband. And it was denied. So I knew that if I didn't go along with what they were making me do, they would never even tell my husband that they would, I would end up on my own, with cut off from my family, cut off from my husband. And I was completely stuck. And it's something that I struggle with and will. It's really hard, but my husband and I filed a lawsuit against Scientology in 2009. We ended up losing, but as part of that lawsuit, I made a list of 60 women I had personally known who were forced to have an abortion. Some of those multiple times, and I will say that our lawsuit included charges relating to forced abortion, human trafficking. Yes, we lost, but in the end, the judge ruled that had we pursued other causes of action, such as false imprisonment, assault and battery, we may have fared differently. We ended up paying the legal fees, I think roughly $46,000 to Scientology. Scientology had offered us and said, hey, we will waive that bill if you do the following. 1, turn over the rights to your husband's book, Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology. 2, agree to never speak publicly about Scientology ever again. 3, turn over any and all communications you've ever had with any media, any former Scientologists. So basically, they wanted to make us their spies and never speak again. So we were like, no. We sold a vehicle, scrambled, did whatever we could, and paid them. And then miraculously, a friend of ours, Jason Begay, said, you should do a fundraiser. And we did. And within a week, we had such an outpouring of support from all over the world. And that those funds were raised back.
good on you. You know, self-respect is priceless in my opinion, and not bowing down to them after everything they've done to you. You know, at least you've got that. And in terms of like being forced to have an abortion, you know, I never thought I'd hear that on my podcast. You know what I mean? You know, abortions for any woman is a tough thing to go through, and that's when you're choosing to do it, let alone when you don't want to do it. God only knows how that must have, you know, impacted you in the long term. I mean, does that sort of thing? I mean, I can see how emotional you got when you spoke about it. Have you managed to sort of find peace, you know, in dealing with that?
It's a work in progress. You know, it's a long road to recovery. There's a lot to unpack. You know, I will say that I have personally benefited greatly from getting therapy, which even that was a huge step for me, because as being that I was born in Scientology, Scientologists believe that psychologists and psychiatrists are the consummate evil, the big bad guy, if you will.
Funny old thing.
Right.
The people who will see right through us, they're evil. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, and I don't get me wrong. I'm very, very grateful for the life that I now have. I'm blessed with 3 amazing children. And so, you know, but it's a lot. It's a lot to recover from. And there's a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma. And, but I will say that when I first literally escaped from Scientology, they chased me across state lines. That's a whole other story. But anyway, I was terrified of them. And I know what they are capable of. And that, you know, that was huge. So even, for example, when my husband released his book, I said, okay, you know, we each do what we do. We each follow the path that we need to take to recover from what we went through. But we're going to have wills in place. We're going to make sure Scientology can never get a hold of our children. We're going to be logical and take the necessary steps to protect ourselves as much as we can. But I will say that it's been part of my process of recovering is speaking out about my experiences and exposing what they do.
Yeah, I mean, we all just want peace in life, right? And that's something that has been that's been robbed from you, like to be able to just sort of sleep at night soundly in the same way other people can when you're always looking over your shoulder. I mean, did you ever turn to any sort of anything to help deal with that? Like, did anyone you know have addiction issues through Scientology, or was that never an issue for you?
I do know of a lot of people who have struggled recovering from Scientology. I know certainly for myself, I to this day have nightmares, you know, so it's hard. Yeah. And I would say for myself, I've leaned into trying to educate myself and walk back the programming of Scientology that was, you know, it's peeling layers of the onion. I don't know what to say. It's a work in progress.
Because you mentioned earlier about the psychologists being the enemy. And I think I might have read somewhere a while back that Sigmund Freud may have played a role in L. Ron Hubbard sort of setting up the auditing, like the diagnostics, is it called? Something like that. Is that right?
Yes. Scientology uses an e-meter. It's you hold cans, and I think it's a galvanometer. I heard someone describe it as recently. I always knew it as kind of a primitive lie detector, but they use that in all of their counseling.
So they just ask you questions and monitor what your body's response is, sort of thing.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
And what sort of things do they ask you when they do that sort of stuff?
Oh, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of different levels, but it can be as benign as recall a time you were happy, all the way to have you murdered somebody? You know,
All right.
They have in Scientology, there's a process that's referred to as security checking or sec checking. It's interrogation using that device. And for example, that's something that I was trained to do at the age of 13 years old.
Wow.
To interrogate adults as to all manner of questions. And again, what does that do to a child to require them to interrogate adults about subject matter that's entirely inappropriate for children?
I mean, if you're keeping people in a constant state of defending themselves, oh, I haven't done anything wrong, they're on the back foot the whole time, and therefore they can't be aggressive towards authority, right? You're constantly keeping them in a state of, defending themselves. But for you at 13 to be hearing grown folks talk like that, where you've got, I mean, did you ever think at that young age, like, I don't feel right about this, or were you just not, because obviously you'd been brainwashed to some degree, so were you ever thinking like that, like maybe this is wrong?
Because of the programming, the little voice was locked in the back room. But was I uncomfortable? Absolutely. What did I not want to be doing any of that? Absolutely. But at the same time, it was normalized, and the environment I was not the only child that was learning to interrogate adults. In fact,
exactly.
Right. In fact, we were encouraged, like, oh, good job. You're doing your study and your training, and you're getting up there, and you're like pat on the back, and oh, parents are so proud of their kids. And, it's encouraged for children to do the training and dive head in, because again, a child is a clean slate.
And every child just wants to make their parents proud, right? Like, so when you're getting that, the reward and the feeling of, oh, I'm great, I'm making everyone proud, of course, you're not really going to question it. You're just going to think, fantastic, I'm winning here. And you mentioned your parents again there. In terms of your mother, did she meet anyone new post, going into Scientology?
Yes, she did. She married my stepfather when I was 10. She met him when I was 8, and then married him when I was 10. And he's American, so that's where we ended up moving to the U.S. when I was 13 years old. But hey, talking about my stepfather and going back to my testimony in the Danny Masterson trial, I think something that illustrates the level of Scientology's involvement in that case is demonstrated by this one piece of information. In March of last year is when the judge ruled that I would be allowed to testify as an expert witness on Scientology in the trial. The defense called a person to counter my expert witness testimony.
No way.
That person was my stepfather.
Wow. God,
Yeah.
they really went and did their research to make sure. Oh, so they wanted someone who knew you, who could contradict you, who could specifically say she's lying because I know her, sort of thing.
Yes, and not even. So he did not end up testifying. I don't even think it's that level, because the fact of the matter is that my stepfather was never in the Sea organization for 14 years. He was not even allowed to know physically where I worked. It was more about the mental head games of get to me by using and weaponizing my family against me.
Did it make you feel a certain way? Like when you heard that, did you get this feeling of, oh no?
I did.
Yeah. So
the sinking, like, I think it's hard for people to understand the lengths Scientology goes to. I mean, having your own family weaponized against you. What religion does that?
And you mentioned, obviously, we've explored how weird it is that they threw a load of kids in this hall and just let them look after each other like Lord of the Flies, like you put so correctly. You've also mentioned previously, like, underage abuse being a problem, sexual abuse and that sort of thing. Was that something you ever seen or heard of in that time?
As a child, yes. I was a victim of sexual assault when I was starting at age 5.
Jesus.
And again, it's layer upon layer of trauma and abuse that's covered up by Scientology.
Who was it who was attacking you?
It was one of the older cadets. One of the there was two different instances. Both of them were older children, like 3-4 years older than I was. And again, the environment was such, there was no adult supervision, no correct oversight. It was, like I said, Lord of the Flies type situation, and no recourse, because if I were to report that, then that would mean that I had done something wrong. Scientology calls it the overt motivator sequence. You've pulled it in. In Scientology, the concept of victim is a negative thing. You're never the victim.
You're not allowed to complain about anything because the machine needs to keep on moving. You're not important.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, wow. That's mind blowing. And look, if you leave a bunch of kids to fend for themselves, as you say, it's like chaos.
Right.
And to come up with the strategy of, oh, by the way, you're just now not allowed to have children at all, is also another like mental solution for a problem. Like, we can't be bothered to house these kids. We don't want to have this problem. Just stop having kids. Like, they don't even think that it's just not even a clever setup, no. which is all the more surprising how people sort of manage to fall for it. And, your mother bringing you into this, as you've gotten older, have you kind of been able to forgive her, or what's your sort of feelings towards her now that you're a parent yourself and you know what it is to love your child as a mother yourself?
Yeah, no, that's a great observations and great question. Yes, absolutely. Becoming a mother myself gave me perspective and helped to unravel my own experiences, even to the point that, my approach prior to becoming a mother had been just shut it away, walk away from it. I was even defending my mother for disconnecting from me. That's the practice in Scientology of cutting off completely. It's not the same as shun. It's kind of next level, like absolutely no communication.
So she just cut you off completely.
Yep. She's never met my
children,
my 3 sons. Yep. And, but I will say that
what were you saying to defend her? Just out of interest, like what excuses would you make for her?
I was just saying that, so this was originally, I was telling my aunt, it's okay. I have to do, I know why she's doing it.
Okay.
So I was defending it not because I believed in it, but because I knew the consequences my mother would face if she did not cooperate with the rules. So for example, I knew that if she talked to me, then she might face not being able to talk to my other siblings, for example. That's a really bad situation to be in, and not so because I understood it, I was trying to not rock the boat. And my aunt, who has never been a Scientologist, very firmly and politely told me to stop defending it.
I can imagine the choice of words was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, she said, stop keeping your mother on this pedestal. What she's doing is absolutely not okay. Yeah. But it really made me realize, like, yes, why am I defending this? Nothing that happened in my childhood was okay. Nothing was normal. Unconditional love does not exist in Scientology. And so I, from such a young age, was forced to bend to and cooperate with a system of life that is completely destructive for a child.
Yeah, if I'm right in thinking, you were told to sign a contract that's 7 years old for a 1 billion-year contract.
Yes.
I think that alone tells you everything you need to know about the level of indoctrination of like get them young and make them think like you are committing everything to us for the rest of your existence. And the idea that a 7-year-old is in any way a fit and proper person and of mature sound of mind and body to be able to go and put a signature on a contract for anything like that. But yeah, in terms of your dating yourself, right? You obviously you met a husband. What is dating like in Scientology?
Well, I'll say that my experience was unique, not unique. It was different than like a civilian Scientologist, for example, where dating might be similar to what it is out here in the real world. Mm-hmm. In my case, I was already working at the headquarters in California, working, 8 a.m. until midnight on a good day. That's where I met my husband, Mark. And so we never dated per se. In Scientology, in the C organization, if you engage in anything other than, a non-passionate kiss, you can get in very, very big trouble and sent to what they call the Rehabilitation Project Force, where it's slave camp labor reprogramming is a short way to explain that. So there's no dating. It's in the C organization. It's pretty much like, okay, let's get married. So in the case of my husband and I, we were married when I was 17 and he was 19. And we're a statistical anomaly in that we've managed to keep our relationship together through hell and high water.
Wow.
So yeah, this August will be our 32nd anniversary.
and am I right in thinking, so there wasn't necessarily much of a connection to start off with? You were just paired up from just by close proximity, right?
Well, we weren't paired up. I mean, we were, it wasn't something we were told, like it wasn't an arranged marriage, no. But the point being that you don't, as Mark likes to say, there was no test driving or whatever
okay. So,
try before you buy.
We're getting married because there ain't no backing out. It's where they get married. Yeah. There ain't no dating, courting. It's full on straight away.
Right.
And I mean, credit to you both. I mean, because not only did you survive all of that time together, but you've managed to continue after a traumatic experience. Because often, when couples go through trauma, sometimes they just can't make it through it, even if they do love each other. Why is it that you guys have lasted then?
I would say, well, first of all, my husband has always been a rebel. And that was honestly what attracted me in the first place, was because, I saw that he was in Scientology from a young age, but not as deep as I was. And I saw that he didn't hold the same regard or the same level of, follow the rules. So he took it far less seriously than I did, which was just such a breath of fresh air to me to go like, wow, okay. And then, fast forward so we were married in 1992, fast forward to 2005, he ended up escaping and leaving me behind because I hadn't been home. It's kind of a long story covered in his book. But in that moment, I realized, of course, I was being told he's now a suppressive person and he's bad and he's gone and you divorce him immediately. I'd already been being pressured to divorce him for the entire time we'd been married directly by David Miscavige.
Was that because he was not conforming to the status quo? Yes,
he was. He was always either doing really, really well or really, really terrible. He's a capable person and worked really hard to do what they wanted done. But he was also not afraid to bend the rules, so he tended to get in a lot more trouble than I did. And so when he escaped, it was this moment of reckoning for me, like, wait a minute. And I honestly, you're not allowed to talk about leaving. So even though we were married for 13 years, when when he escaped, never once had we talked about, let's get the hell out of here. Never. Because, your chances are you're going to be interrogated. If one partner says and spills the beans, then you're both in trouble. You'll be separated. It's like layer upon layer of control mechanisms.
So he felt, I guess, that he couldn't tell you because he's implicating you if you know about it, but also he's also worried that you might freak out and say something to someone.
Right.
Wow. They even come between your marriage. They're just everywhere, isn't it? It's like this thing that you can't even see, but it's everywhere.
And that is where it's important to know. It's not just, it infiltrates every aspect of your life.
It really reminds me of a movie I've seen, and I think it's called Equilibrium. The guy who played Batman, Christian Bale's in it, and he takes a tablet every day in the morning, and it stops him from feeling emotion. And it's very like soldier-esque, like everyone does what they're told, and like it feels a lot like it's the closest thing I've heard to that movie, ironically. And one of the things I heard that happened to your husband is he was put in something called the hole.
Yes.
What is the hole? Because it sounds horrible.
Yeah, I was put in the hole too. Ironically, I was put in the hole for refusing to divorce my husband.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah. It's and again, just understand that it's cruel and unusual punishment to the next level. But it was these double wide trailers where staff that were considered to be in non-compliance with David Miscavige were confined to this building. And it got much, much worse after I escaped, to the point where there were literally, the doors were locked. There were security guards 24/7. Staff were made to beat each other up, confess to their sins. It was just absolute insanity. But even in the time that I was there was the beginning of that, where staff were being told they were suppressive people, even though they've committed to 1 billion years. That's not enough. Now they're being told they're bad people just because David Miscavige doesn't like them, or they didn't do what he wanted the right way, or they didn't do what he wanted done fast enough. Could be anything.
Is that the worst punishment you've heard of in terms of just like ones that you know of?
No, it's not the worst. For example, those same management executives were made to go out and scoop up dried up excrement from a aeration pond at that property with no hazmat suits, no nothing, just like shovel, stick it in a bucket, no protection. Several staff ended up in hospital with respiratory issues because of that. A member of the Sea organization, a staff member that worked at that property, she unalived herself because she was being prevented from seeing her husband. And then they covered that up and said it was just an accident when she fell into a high voltage electrical chamber.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you can imagine how that would happen when people are being like fucked with so much in their head. Like, some people just haven't got the resistance to keep going. And, I think I might have read somewhere that there's a lot of like almost solitary confinement tactics where people are just sort of restricted and stuck in a room and not allowed out, sort of thing, for hours. And it does sound horrendous. What obviously you had your escape moment. What do you think your rock bottom moment was, where you were like, I'm gonna get the hell out of here at some point? Was there a moment, or did you have an opportunity and just think, I'm going now?
Yeah. It was when Mark escaped. I was keeping up the facade, even in my mind, that I would just persist through and keep going for the sake of the people I loved, my husband, my family. I stood to lose all of that. So I just stubbornly felt I didn't see that I had another option until the moment that Mark was no longer there. And I just reached a point where I was like, I'm not going to be able to survive this. I will fail. And whatever state that puts me in, I'm going to lose this battle unless I get the heck out of here.
It really reminds me of the way I'm a TV binge watcher, and I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones.
Yes.
There's a moment where Joffrey is torturing Sansa, and he's just lobbed her dad's head off at one point, and then they're asking her, like, are you going to escape? And she's like, Joffrey is my king. I must be, like, and that's the sort of, like, you're not even allowed to even start thinking about escaping, because if you do, you're worried you're going to say something and give the game away. So you're even bullshitting yourself, which is quite, shows the extreme levels that you had to go through. And in this instance, Joffrey is David Miscavige, which is quite seems like quite a good crossover character if they ever need someone to play David Miscavige in the movie.
Great observation. I would nail it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I hope that we can do a part 2 where I can go into greater lengths, because obviously this is a bit of a introductory look at what Scientology can do to people, and bloody hell, it's done a lot. My final question for today, Claire, is how would you like to be remembered?
What a great question. I would like to be remembered for my work to help people get out and to expose the truth of Scientology, despite huge obstacles to overcome, despite my own trauma. I think it's really important to rise above and just try to do good in this world. And that's my answer. There's no roadmap to any of this, right?
Absolutely.
We just but my passion is to help people understand what this really is and to not get lured into this dangerous organization.
Well, there's no doubt that, the work that you and your husband are doing is preventing them from luring more people in. So that is a mission accomplished 100%. I'll put the link to all of the stuff that you guys are doing, the books, etc., in the description below. People can check out your YouTube channel. Can you name it again just before we go?
Absolutely. Yeah. Blown for Good, Exposing Scientology. And we also have we have it on podcast and
amazing,
all the platforms. Yes.
Well, that was a Claire on the True Geordie Podcast. Thank you very much. Guys, don't forget to hit that like button, stay subscribed to the True Geordie Podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.